A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Luke. That very day, the first day of the week, 2 of Jesus' disciples were going to a village 7 miles from Jerusalem called Emmaus. And they were conversing about all the things that had occurred. And it happened that while they were conversing and debating, Jesus himself drew near and walked with them, but their eyes were prevented from recognizing him. He asked them, "What are you discussing as you walk along?" They stopped, looking downcast. One of them, named Cleopas, said to him in reply, "Are you the only visitor to Jerusalem who does not know of the things that have taken place there in these days?" And he replied to them, "What sort of things?" They said to Jesus, "The things that happened to Jesus the Nazarene, who was a prophet mighty in deed and word before God and all the people, how our chief priests and rulers both handed him over to a sentence of death and crucified him. But we were hoping that he would be the one to redeem Israel. And besides all this, it is now the 3rd day since this took place. Some women from our group, however, have astounded us. They were at the tomb early in the morning and did not find his body. They came back and reported that they had indeed seen a vision of angels who announced that he was alive. Then some of those with us went to the tomb and found things just as the woman had described. But him they did not see." And Jesus said to them, "Oh, how foolish you are! How slow of heart to believe all that the prophets spoke. Was it not necessary that the Christ should suffer these things and enter into his glory?" Then, beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he interpreted to them what referred to him in all of the Scriptures. As they approached the village to which they were going, he gave the impression that he was going on farther. But they urged him, "Stay with us, for it is nearly evening and the day is almost over." So Jesus went in to stay with them. And it happened that while he was with them at table, he took bread, said the blessing, broke it, and gave it to them. With that, their eyes were opened, and they recognized him. But he vanished from their sight. Then they said to each other, "Were not our hearts burning within us while he spoke to us on the way and opened the Scriptures to us?" So they set out at once and returned to Jerusalem, where they found gathered together the 11 and those with who were saying, "The Lord has truly been raised and has appeared to Simon." Then the 2 recounted what had taken place on the way and how he was known to them in the breaking of the bread. My sisters and brothers, the gospel of the Lord. Seven. It has been 7 Sundays, Jesu Church, since we have been together during this current crisis. And how I long to see all of you face to face, how I long to pray together again in our church. And so I ask all of you from these past 7 weeks, how are you coping during this time of crisis? How are you enduring? Perhaps you're struggling. Perhaps you're struggling mightily. And that is not a problem. As a matter of fact, it's okay because we're supposed to struggle even when there are crises. It's part of the human conditions. It's also not a problem because today the gospel teaches us that we can actually thrive during a crisis and not just survive. This is the famous story of the road to Emmaus. We see Cleopas and his companion, who is most likely to be his wife. So we have a couple walking down the street. They're sad, and they're in a crisis as well because they're walking away from Jerusalem because they had hoped that it was Jesus who was crucified that would redeem them. And yet he was crucified, and to them, he did not redeem Israel. They're walking away in today's gospel in the same way that we've had to walk away from our church, our community. Yet, believe it or not, they teach us something in this story. Two major things they teach us. First, as they're walking away from their community, while they're sad, their heads are down, they're downtrodden, all of a sudden a stranger appears to them and they feel comfortable, they feel consoled, and they're honest with the stranger. They speak clearly about what their hopes had been. They mention their sadness, their disappointments. And once they do that, things start to change. And so I ask all of you, Jesu Church, are you honest with yourself right now? Are you honest with your spouse, your friends, your loved ones, what you're feeling, what's going on with you during this crisis? Your frustrations, your disappointments, your own sadness, are you sharing that with others and not being ashamed? The second most important thing about this story is the following. Notice that Cleopas is devastated at how the Jesus story unfolded. He says to the stranger, who they don't know yet as to be Jesus, "Are you the only visitor," he says to Jesus, "are you the only one from Jerusalem who does not know of the things that have taken place in these past few days?" Jesus quickly responds by saying, "What sort of things?" And Cleopas and his spouse says, "The things that happened to Jesus the Nazarene, who was a prophet, mighty in deed and word before God and all the people, and how the chief priests and rulers handed him over, killed him, crucified him." And here's the key line. "But we were hoping that he would be the one to redeem Israel." Cleopas, his spouse, his wife, are disappointed, sad, because they thought the story was over. They did not, however, understand or see the story from God's eyes. You see, the couple sees the Jesus story from their viewpoint, from what they thought the outcome would be. And as I've said before, as Christians, as Catholics, we do not control the story. We cannot predict nor determine the outcome, because the outcome is in God's hands. In spiritual life, we got to get out of the outcome business. You see, they thought that Jesus would redeem Israel from suffering, from the suffering that their people were enduring under their oppression of the Romans, from poverty, sickness, leprosy, their own pandemics. Since they thought that Jesus was the one to redeem them from suffering, they missed the point. Because Jesus did indeed redeem them, not from suffering, but through suffering. That's the key. Jesus had to go through the suffering. He had to go through the crucifixion. He had to be tortured, and he comes out the other side by going through it, not running away. My sisters and brothers, we have an opportunity right here, right now, today. First, from the first lesson of the story, to speak to Jesus, to give him every feeling, emotion, thought that we have during this crisis, because he's in our home. Even though we are separated from each other, even though it's been 7 weeks, Jesus is with us in our solidarity, our separateness, and social distancing. And he will liberate us, I guarantee it, if we are honest with him about all of our thoughts, feelings, sadness, whatever we are going through during this crisis of COVID-19. The second thing is this. If we cease to predict the outcome of the current crisis of COVID-19, if we cease to try to control the story and not see it through our own limited human eyes, but see it through God's eyes, then there will be more opportunities for us than we can ever imagine. You see, there's so many people that are saying that we're going to have a new normal. But in the words of Sonia Renee Taylor, whose words I will paraphrase here, she says this: we will not go back to normal, because normal never was. Our pre-corona existence was not normal, other than we normalized so many negative things: greed, inequity, exhaustion, depletion, disconnection, hoarding, racism, hate, and how we should not long to return, my friends, to these things. We are now being given the opportunity to stitch a new garment, to let God create a new world, one that fits and brings all of humanity together. Isn't that good news, church? We can actually thrive during this crisis, not just survive. And if we let go and let God control the story, and know that with God, we cannot run away from the suffering we are now enduring, the suffering we are now facing. But we have the opportunity, like Jesus, to move through the suffering, to suffer together, because when we are able to suffer together and come together as one human race, when there's a struggle, God will transform it to joy, the greatest joy we can ever experience. I ask all of you, therefore, how will you take up this difficult but awesome challenge this week and the weeks to come? How will we go through the suffering together, or continue to do it together and with God? Because God has the final say, and by believing in Him, in His redemption, and not worrying, it is in the power of His resurrection. He makes all things new every moment, every day. When we step into that empty tomb and seize the opportunity and choose to believe that God has the final say, that it is His story, and He will redeem us here and now from COVID-19, from all our struggles, trials, and tribulations, through suffering. May we call upon Him now and help us to go through this suffering together so that we may experience the resurrection anew. My sisters and brothers, amen.